I think in the beginning, sometimes it can feel like being at a party where everyone else is on the inside joke, but you're not. But because you've chosen to move to this country, you can't really just leave the party. So it's a lot of learning.
It's interesting, and I think that doesn't change. So the two things that you spoke about, the accent and the lived experience.
I am Wenmiao, co-founder of Quantum Dice. We enhance cybersecurity and simulations through a quantum random number generator.
So what are you working on, and what problem are you solving?
So in our business, we enhance cybersecurity and also simulations, and we do that by using quantum mechanics. I like to describe quantum technologies as a family of 3 siblings. There's quantum communications, quantum computing, and also quantum sensing. And the area that we are focusing on is a segment of quantum communications. And there's also another way, which is looking at how can AI tools be used to help speed up or to enhance the development of quantum computing.
I mean, what is the thought process, or what is the motivator for you to even start?
My personal motivation back then, so before finishing university, was
Wemya, thank you so much for coming to the pod.
thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. Like I was mentioning just before we got started, how many people would I have an opportunity to speak to in this niche? I mean, quantum technology. Before I get into that, let's jump into, you're here in the UK, but you were born and raised in Singapore, I believe.
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
moved to
So
the
if you can just walk me
UK.
through that journey.
Sure. So I moved to the UK from Singapore when I was 10. And previous to that, I had actually also lived for 1 year in Australia, so in Western Australia in Perth. And for me, moving to the UK, at the age of 10, just before kids finished primary school, was quite a big change because the cultural difference was quite big. But I think in the UK culture, I've lived here for more than half my life now. And I really embrace just the resilience and also the inclusivity that exists here in the UK.
And what was the reason for the move? Was it your entire family that shifted, or you came here to study, or?
Yeah, so my dad is an academic, and we decided to move because he found a position in the UK. And I think that they were also quite keen for me to have a British education. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the Singaporean education system, but it's very, very intense. There's exams, as soon as you enter primary school, and it's a very competitive ecosystem. But I think my parents wanted me to also experience the British education system, where there's more time for hobbies and more time to develop, my own self-interest as well when I'm in my teens.
I think pretty similar maybe to the Indian education system as well. Like that is also pretty intense. Intense to, I mean, I'm digressing slightly, but intense to an extent that sadly, it causes a lot of trauma and stress to a lot of kids. And I mean, there's so many, every now and again you hear, kids taking their lives because they're just so much under pressure. And I think the pressure obviously comes from the parents as well. Everybody needs to become a doctor or an engineer. So I don't know how much of a pressure there is in the education system in Singapore, but yeah, India is pretty intense.
I can definitely believe that, and I think there are definitely similarities. I remember noticing when I was at primary school, this is probably when I was 6 or 7 in Singapore, noticing that more than half the kids in my class actually ended up needing to have either like spectacles or contact lenses.
Wow.
And that's just because of the amount of work you need to do with studying. And at that really early stage of someone's life, the strain on your eyes can lead to short-sightedness.
Yeah. And I think, as you grow up as well, I mean, there's as adults where, there's your childhood programming develops you into the adults that you become. So I think, I don't know if I'm against or not against systems like that, but perhaps it works for them. But things are definitely shifting. There's a lot of people vocalizing and talking about things like that. So definitely huge difference between how things are in the Western world versus countries like that. You moving here, so you moved with your family. Did you guys know anyone else, or I mean, were you too young to understand the transition, what was really happening?
Well, I think for me, because we had already done 1 year in Australia, I was, not completely new when we moved to the UK in terms of changing schools, having to make new friends, and also losing existing friends. I think one of the main differences that I did notice after we made the move to the UK is actually the cultural difference, because in Singapore it's very multicultural. So for example, in Singapore, Tamil, Malaysian, English, and also Mandarin are four of the most commonly spoken languages. And on the subway, on road signs, you'd always see writings in these four signs. And I think that generally it's more of a sharing culture. So people are generally more open. In Australia, people are very, very open. So as a child moving there, I didn't really feel that, I needed to fit in or felt any discomfort. But I did notice in the first move to the UK, I joined at the start of year 6, which is the last year of primary school. And the school that I joined mostly had children and they've been in the same school, in the same classes even since they were 5. So for me, joining as someone who looked different, but is also not from that, community, that took some time. And then add on top of that, the kind of like more reserved nature of some Brits. I think that took a while to get used to. But I think now I've been in the UK and I would actually count the UK as my home.
So how were you? I mean, you're so young, and how are you navigating that space? I mean, are you talking to your parents, or within the schooling system, is there like some sort of a support system to help kids navigate the change?
Oh, so for my school, no. When we moved from Singapore to the UK, we did know some family friends, and it was actually people that my dad used to work in the same research group with when he was at university. So it was nice that there was that connection at the parents' level, and they had children. So it was like a natural community that we could be part of. But in school, I was probably the only kid from overseas to join that school. And yeah, there were no, formal, structures in school to deal with that. Fortunately, I think because in Singapore it's a bilingual education system, I could speak English and I could speak Mandarin, so the language wasn't really a barrier. But from Singapore, I think I initially had a very Singaporean accent when I spoke English. And I do remember at some times when I was in primary school feeling uncomfortable about that, although no one really made fun of me, but I just did notice the difference. Now when I look back, I almost think, gosh, like it's crazy because English wasn't my first language. Mandarin was. I only started learning English properly when I was 5. But I feel like my Mandarin accent never changes. It's how my parents sound like. But with my English accent, it changes so much depending on who I'm with. And it's not something that I do consciously, but I think it's just a result of having moved in many different English-speaking communities across the world.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I asked you about that change is because kids can be mean.
Yeah.
And if you don't have like a proper support system, or you don't know who to talk to, and if you are the one who stands out, it can be quite tough. I mean, it can be quite tough in general anyway, at that age. And then if you're navigating that space, perhaps maybe more support system is needed.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I think for me personally, I don't think anyone was mean to me.
Okay.
And I think perhaps it's because I went to an all-girls school. And I think I was able to be friends with most of the people there. What I did notice, and I still have friends, very close friends who I have known since I was 10, so since I first moved here. But I think perhaps what I do notice when I reflect back now is I think at times I felt lonely, and it's not because there were no other children to play with. But it's more about shared experiences. And it wasn't until I went to university in Oxford where there were more, immigrant people or people who had parents from other countries, but they were born in the UK. So with them, I actually felt this natural rapport. And there were certain experiences that we actually shared that I think allowed me to really deeply connect with them at a really, really fast speed. And there were just topics that I could discuss with other, for example, British-born Chinese or kind of first or second generation Chinese immigrants to the UK that I wouldn't really be able to discuss to the same depth with my friends from my hometown.
It's interesting, and I think that doesn't change. So the two things that you spoke about, the accent and the lived experience. I mean, I moved to the UK about just over 5 years ago, and I feel the same. I was more cognizant or conscious of that fact, I think, at least 2 years ago. Now things are changing gradually. I think this just becomes your normal. I remember when I first came here, I was trying so hard to put on a British accent. That obviously didn't work. But the lived experience, I think, and that I don't think about anymore, simply because I just feel like London is such a great melting pot, and people are just so welcoming, and people actually don't give a shit. Like it's just amazing, and I think that is also what's beautiful about this place, about the city. But I think the lived experience is something that I kind of miss. Is just when I'm, like out with a group of people and they talk about things way back when, when they were kids and they were in this place in the UK and that place in the UK, and I can't relate. And I also can't add on to that conversation because I don't know what they're talking about. So I think that is something that perhaps I'm going to be living with for the rest of my life. Because I think it's the early years as well. Maybe not so much for you because you also moved here when you were quite young. But for me, I think it's just like, crap, like that's not going to come back. I'm going to be creating more experiences as I move forward. But I think that's going to be a little bit somehow like something that is going to be missed or would be missing.
Understand that. And I can also definitely relate to that. I think it probably took me until I was 16 to really feel that I fit in, or that I had enough years of shared experiences to be able to contribute towards that. I think in the beginning, sometimes it can feel like being at a party where everyone else is on the inside joke, but you're not. But because you've chosen to move to this country, you can't really just leave the party. So it's a lot of learning.
Okay, so it took you 6 years. I'm on 5.5. I'm going to give another 6 months. So hopefully things change for me also after 6 years. So now, I mean, I know you started, or perhaps after the university, or when you were in the university, you started your business. If you can just walk me through that. And did you do anything before that?
So I studied chemistry, which was an integrated kind of like 4-year undergrad plus masters at Oxford. Over the course of my university, I kind of knew very quickly that I did not want to be a research scientist, but I was interested in business. And I did kind of a patent attorney internship and also an internship in procurement at Centrica, which is like a larger organization. After those internships, I learned two things. I learned that kind of like scientific research turning into products is a long process, but one that I found really interesting because it's interesting learning about new research and how they can be applied. And also second, that I knew I didn't want to start my career working in a very, very large organization because I wanted to be able to get exposure to more departments across the company, or just more ways and also more business challenges to be able to learn from, basically. And so my last year at university, I saw this advert for a new program, which is called the Student Entrepreneurs Program, part funded by our local VC firm. And essentially the university created a 4-week program open to any student at whatever year of study that they were in, and in all disciplines. And they opened up the IP portfolio that they had at Oxford to the students. And the idea is we form teams, choose a patent to try and build an initial business plan around, and pitch to our local VC. And one team, which was our team, were able to win some initial funding.
Wow.
So that's how the story of Quantum Dice came around.
Oh, wow. Well, first of all, congratulations. Talking about, building companies is a very hard and long process in itself. I mean, and I'm talking about like simple products. And then you choose a niche or a segment, which is already so complex. And like you rightly said, okay, this is like a long process. So, I mean, what is the thought process, or what is the motivator for you to even start?
My personal motivation back then, so before finishing university, was I wanted to learn about how you actually take research and turn it into a product that is used by companies or by people. And I also wanted to learn about how to raise funding for a tech-focused business, and also how to build a team around you to do that. I think I was very hungry for that experience, especially after just finishing a degree in chemistry at Oxford, and I was just really, really hungry to learn about the more commercial aspects. And I think quite a lot of that was satisfied, or maybe even kind of like enhanced by this quantum technology enterprise fellowship that I did. We kind of started in about a 4-week program, and then we went to a year-long, almost incubator / funded accelerator, specifically targeted to help early stage academic founders create businesses in quantum technologies. And it was almost like a mini MBA with a lot of like practitioner-led training, but it was tailored for people trying to build quantum tech businesses. So it was very nice to have such a focused, education, but also direct application of the learnings that we had over that program.
Walk me through the space, quantum tech. How big is it? What's the market movement? VCs, how receptive they are or not? Before we get into exactly what you're doing, just walk me through the space.
Yep. So I like to describe quantum technologies as a family of three siblings. There's quantum communications, quantum computing, and also quantum sensing. And quantum computing is probably the younger sibling that gets all the attention, as quantum computing does in the press and generally. But quantum sensing, quantum communications, these are also two super important technology areas. And the area that we are focusing on is a segment of quantum communications.
Has this whole new, everybody's talking about AI. This is the biggest buzzword, and now AI agents and so on. Has that advancement in technology somehow affected the growth of quantum tech?
Good question. Not one that I'm working on with my company, but from what I understand, there are companies basically seeing how quantum computing capabilities currently can be used to enhance AI. And there's also another way, which is looking at how can AI tools be used to help speed up or to enhance the development of quantum computing.
Gotcha. Okay. So again, circling back, because if there's growth impact because of the advancement of technology and the space that we're in now, is there more interest from the VC world? Is there more money being injected within the space, you think?
Yeah, good question. I'll answer by giving an example. When we did our first fundraise back in kind of 2020, we spoke to over 100 VCs and also some angel groups. And back then, out of the 100, we only found 2 VCs back then who had a clearly developed quantum technology investment thesis. One was in Singapore and the other was in France. But then fast forward to kind of last year when we did another fundraise and also the current climate now, a lot more deep tech VCs have quantum investment thesis. I think part of that was actually supported by the UK government, given that we're a UK-based company. They identify quantum technologies to be one of the 3 key areas of focus, both in terms of research, but also in commercialization as well.
Understood. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Now let's deep dive into your business specifically. So what are you working on and what problem are you solving?
So in our business, we enhance cybersecurity and also simulations. And we do that by using quantum mechanics to build a product that's called a quantum random number generator. Essentially, any type of encryption depends on random numbers for encryption keys. But to have a high quality and also trusted source of randomness or a high quality random number generator is actually quite difficult. Existing solutions are either pseudo random number generators, so from computer algorithms, but because they're pseudo, they repeat after a certain amount of time, which means that if you use those to make encryption keys, then it's easy for someone to use brute force to be able to predict what the encryption key is. And once they have the key, then they can get into the encryption system. The other solution is to use hardware-based random number generators. There's a really nice graphic from Cloudflare where they built a whole wall and they had a wall of lava lamps. And they actually had a camera pointing at it, I believe. And they basically used the movement of the bubbles in the lava lamps to create the randomness. And that is also, a true random number generator. But of course, that takes up a lot of space. It's not really easy to scale or to miniaturize or to, for example, send into space if you want to. And so that's one of the limitations. And essentially what we're doing is we are leveraging quantum mechanics, which is fundamentally probabilistic. And we are using it to generate true random numbers. But we also build hardware, and any hardware can be, attacked physically, or, hardware can break down over time. And sometimes it's difficult to know when the randomness from a hardware breaking down actually how that affects the quality of the random numbers that's being generated. So the kind of innovation that we have is a way for live monitoring of our hardware random number generator device. And it's a way that we have a protocol and it's able to both detect for any physical changes to the hardware. So it could come from increasing temperature around the hardware. So it detects with physical changes, it's able to account for it and also react to any physical changes. So essentially, even if someone tries to physically attack our device, we have a protocol that notices that and accommodates for it, so that whatever leaves our device and whatever is being used to make the encryption keys is kind of guaranteed to be truly random.
Wow. I mean, this is all first-hand news to me because obviously, like I said, how many people will I speak to who are in this space? Not a space that I particularly have explored in the past as well. So this is pretty interesting. And I'm going to perhaps ask you a few dumb questions off the back of it as well. So is there any correlation between the blockchain space and what you're doing? What I'm trying to understand is because of encryption, because of random number generation and things like that. Does that somehow sink in?
Mm. In terms of the process flow, so our company, we would sell our quantum random number generator services to engineers working to build, encryption protocols. And it could be security engineers working in, say, blockchain companies, or it could be security engineers working for telecommunication companies, or it could be security engineers working in banks. So essentially, we supply the cybersecurity industry, and that's quite, cross-cutting based on that.
Got it. Okay, fine. So your ICP is the companies or the segments that you named, and what is the use case? So I mean, are they using this in vaults? Are they? I mean, where exactly are they using this? Your product and your service?
One example is the demo that we did with AT&T, so the American telecommunications company, back in March. They built a demo where they built a VPN,
Yes.
and as encryption keys for that VPN, they used our quantum random number generator.
Wow. And you spoke about hardware as well, but so where's the hardware applied?
Yep. So for example, a company like AT&T, they would have maybe a handful of pieces of our hardware, and they would use that to basically like stream random numbers to be used in VPNs that they're building or in other kind of cybersecurity protocols. So it's almost like they would host a couple of hardware devices, but be able to use it across their network.
And then is your service then like a one and done service because you've supplied the hardware, and now they're generating these numbers? So do they need you again? Like, I mean, how does that work?
Yep, good question. So essentially we have two business models. One is just pure hardware sales, like one-time fee, and the client get to keep it. That is generally for example, clients that we have in the space sector. So for example, we're working with a Singaporean satellite communications company called Spectral. They are building communication systems using quantum key distribution, and they're building these small CubeSats to be launched into space. And in these CubeSats, they are putting one of our quantum random number generators to be the source of the encryption keys. So for them, because we know it's going to be a launch, we kind of like costed it, so they pay like a one-time fee, and they are then able to use the hardware as and when they need it. For other clients, we kind of have like entropy as a service model. So we call it quantum entropy as a service, or keys for short. And essentially, we can host hardware and basically give clients like access keys so that they can remotely access the random numbers that we are generating.
Wow, that's first of all, that sounds pretty exciting that your product has the potential to go into space. Like that's just crazy. Congratulations on that. Also, your target customer, you're talking about all these big names, so enterprise level customers, perhaps government is your customer as well. What's your customer acquisition type of model? I mean, how are you acquiring these customers?
To be honest, up to now, word of mouth, and also through our own networks, and also through some of the more quantum focused conferences that happen.
Okay.
I think our industry, especially if we just think about quantum technologies, is still very, very nascent. It's growing, but it's very much, technology driven, and it's definitely not mature as something as, say, the telecommunications industry, which has been around for ages. But what I and also my co-founders have seen happen in the past few years is actually now when we go to other industry conferences. So for example, Mobile World Congress, which is the largest telecommunications conference, we're starting to see a small kind of like spread of quantum-enabled solutions and demonstrations of that in those types of industry organizations as well.
Yeah, because I was going to say, so maybe because there's less competition, it's easier for you to acquire or at least get your foot in the door with these clients. But perhaps maybe because the industry is growing, one, maybe not no competition, but perhaps less competition. But when you have less competition, and when the industry is at this stage, do you have a challenge of educating the customer? Like, I mean, has that been a blocker ever?
You've hit the nail on the head. So I think market education is a key thing that almost every other quantum technology focused company has needed to do and is still doing. And as you were saying earlier, the market is still quite young. So perhaps there's less competition, but it also means that there really isn't as many enterprise customers with budget and resources ready to invest into either trying or buying quantum technologies. So for us, it's really finding that sweet spot of finding the enterprise teams or particular people within organizations who are ready to become quantum champions, to fight for the resources and the budget, and to really, bring people further in their own organization onto this quantum project.
And is there like, I mean, are people then looking at it as a good to have or like a business criticality? Like, I mean, it's a necessity. Like, I mean, once you've explained to them, they're like, oh yeah, I mean, this is something that we have to absolutely do. Or they've been living without this up until now. Because, I mean, I'm looking at the economy as well. I mean, the downturn in the economy, people are looking at costs and bottom line and all that. So are they looking at this as just additional cost and something that we can explore maybe later? Or has the world shifted where cybersecurity in itself is evolving and it is become a necessity to now, level up everything people are doing?
I would probably say that cybersecurity has grown in importance and also necessity across the past 5 to 6 years that the company Quantum Dice has been around for. With regards to our product and also quantum enabled technologies in particular, I think it really depends on the organization, because a lot of the times we fit into a larger conversation in that company, which is how do we move towards post-quantum security? And here they're talking about, not just having quantum random number generators for the encryption keys, but they're actually saying how can we actually change security protocols to make it post-quantum, so to make it safe to potential attacks from quantum computers.
Wow.
But of course, quantum computers is not completely ready yet, but it will be at some point in time. And the kind of like messaging right now, it's look at the data that you have and really find the data that needs to be secure for the next 20, 30 years. And once you have identified those pieces of data, then that's the group of data that needs to be protected using post-quantum cryptography or using QKD methods.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, especially 20, 30 years, because my next question was going to be scalability. So where do you see this scaling, into what space, and how far can you scale this? But if people, I mean, it's great that people are already proactive and trying to future-proof everything that they do today. And because they know the technology is coming, it's not if, it's only when. So from a scale, I mean, I'm sure you guys have been thinking about scalability and where the product is eventually going to land. And what is your thought process on that?
Yep. So I think part of it is kind of people, enterprise innovators being proactive. The other is it's actually kind of government driven. So for example, the US White House and also the UK and CSC have both released white papers where, well, for the US, it's more kind of it's more mandating federal agencies to do a crypto inventory exercise to become post-quantum ready. And there's a timeline associated with that. There's slightly different timelines between the US and UK. I think 2028 was one number that I've heard. And the idea is by 2028, you need to have a good idea of what sort of data in your organization needs longer term security and have this kind of like implementation plan in place for how you would upgrade your security infrastructure to become quantum ready. And then the other part it's also kind of like standards and regulations driven. And in a lot of industry standards bodies, so for example, the GSMA, for example, there's already quite a few working groups and a lot of activities with kind of contributors from enterprises and academic institutions all across the world on basically creating white papers to show, what types of quantum solutions do we already have? What is the current state of quantum computing? And also what could potentially happen in the future and how does this affect, so for example, the telecommunications market?
Wow. 2028 is not that far along. I mean, it's interesting that, looks like things are moving that much
Yep.
more quickly. I mean, and maybe that leads on to my next question. Where do you see the company being at 2028 in the next 3 years? Like, what's the vision for the company?
Yeah, good question. And also going back to your earlier questions about scalability. So I think we started off building hardware and kind of building really large hardware that can go into data centers. What we are doing now is basically exploring this quantum entropy as a service. So this kind of like we host the hardware and clients, they don't need to, host, buy, manage, destroy hardware. So for them, it's a lower barrier to entry to try. And also because it's quantum entropy as a service, it's easily scalable because they don't need to like build fiber and they don't need to buy a lot of new hardware. And we can actually send the higher quality random numbers even to very kind of like low resource IoT devices, so like sensors, etc., in various smart factories or various networks. So that's one route. The other is actually looking at making chips of quantum random number generators and then being able to do so at a volume that's high enough to drive the cost per chip down and to have these chips embedded even inside consumer devices like your smartphones or your laptops. And we're not going to be the first company to do this because there's already a Swiss and South Korean company called ID Quantique who have already created early like quantum random number generator chips and put that into Samsung's smartphones, which is only available in South Korea. And in South Korea, they already have a lot of implementations of quantum key distribution, so quantum communication networks in kind of in their SK Telecom group. So it's just, we're in the UK watching all of these progress and actual deployments happening in other countries. And it's going to be interesting to see how this develops because quantum is, I think, probably classed as a sovereign technology. And I think the UK is definitely very alert and, want to ensure that it does not fall behind on this.
I'm glad we're having this conversation because this is super exciting. I
Yeah.
mean, this is not the usual conversation you have with people. I mean, it's also great to see how the world is shifting, and how enterprises and governments are being proactive into the next stage of technology. For someone starting out today within this space, I'm excited. Perhaps somebody listening is also now getting excited and thinking, oh, wow, this is an interesting space for me to get into. How would you advise them? I mean, what route would you ask them or advise them to get into? Is the university route the easiest or the fastest route, or is there any way else people can get into the space?
In terms of learning about the quantum tech space, I think there's normally like a free conference that happens in November in the UK in London called the UK National Quantum Technology Showcase. And it's basically, the conference that, if you're working in quantum or if you're a quantum company in the UK, or if you're a quantum department in like a larger company such as IBM, then you want to be there to show and tell what you're doing, etc. So that's like a really condensed, in my view, efficient way to learn about the quantum sector in the UK. And I think a lot of the talks are about use cases and applications. So it's a good way to get a feel for where research is and also where application and actual products are. Otherwise, in the UK, there's also the Institute of Physics. They have a quantum business innovation and growth group, and it's made up of members from the quantum startup community, from kind of like more national laboratories, from academia, and it's all about, how can we amplify what quantum companies are doing in the UK to people outside of the quantum world.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Whoever is, this is super exciting and interesting, and I wish you all the best. And hopefully the 2028 plan and the vision that you have and your team has, all that comes to light and then some. Keeping the business and quantum tech aside, I generally ask this last question to all my guests, and I'm going to throw that at you as well. Going back to that young girl at the age of 10, moving to the UK. You've obviously achieved so much, and you're doing so much in your life now. But what would you tell that girl today?
I would tell her to just enjoy life as it comes and to keep going, and to not lose that curiosity that's always been there.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on the pod, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure speaking to you.